Welcome to FounderLine, the show where we answer your questions about startups. I'm your host, Joe Beninato. Thanks for joining us. It's great to have you all with us. Our goal with FounderLine is to provide a forum where people who have questions about startups can get their questions answered. So maybe you're thinking about starting a company, maybe you're a founder who's already started a company and you're dealing with an issue that you need some help with. You might be an employee who's thinking about joining a startup and you want to know more about the startup situation. Whatever it might be, we're here to try and help you today. So please get in touch with us and we'll see what we can do. This is a live show, and in order for this to work, we need to get questions from the audience. You can do that in 3 different ways. You can call us. The number is 1-844-4FOUNDER. That's 844-436-8633. You can email us. The email address is help@founderline.com. And you can also reach us on Twitter. Our handle is @FounderLine. With that, let's get started. Our guest today is Russ Siegelman, who's an active angel investor and is also busy teaching classes at Stanford Business School. Russ and I have been friends for a long time, worked together on multiple companies, and Russ, it's great to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us.
I'm honored to be here.
So usually before we dive into questions from the audience, we spend a few minutes just talking about your background and so people can get to know you a little bit. You are one of the few people I know actually who worked at Microsoft and spent, what, 7 years there? Worked for Bill Gates, helped to start MSN, the Microsoft network way back when. So, when people have these iconic, people in the industry they've worked with, I always like to see if we can get a little insight, not their dirty laundry, obviously, but maybe you can tell us what it was like, working at Microsoft and then working with Bill during that time period.
Sure. It was heady days. I was employee roughly 2,000 and some, so it wasn't a startup, but there was a lot of growth over those 7 years. When I left, I think there were 26,000 employees, and revenue went from 800 million a year to 20 some odd billion a year. So, it certainly was a lot of people being hired every Monday and a lot of new projects being started. I think it probably wasn't that different than what you think goes on in Silicon Valley tech companies today. Is what Google's gone through the last 5 to 10 years. Facebook, yeah. I think maybe it was a little different because it was a little isolated in Seattle. There wasn't the same kind of ecosystem that's been down here in Silicon Valley, but pretty similar, I would think.
And what about working for Bill? What was that like?
Yeah, so Bill was a fun person to work for. Obviously he was very busy, and so you didn't see him that often. But I did appreciate his insights. He's a very demanding, hard-driving guy, and so working for him created some pressure to deliver, but that was good. And I had a lot of responsibility at an early stage in my career there, and that was fun.
Awesome. And he's obviously, from what I hear, mellowed out a little bit and now focusing a little bit more on the philanthropy side and some amazing things, right, with malaria and everything else. So.
Yeah, no, the Gates Foundation is amazing, and I don't know that he's mellowed out. I don't know, but I would say, I don't hold. There's this reputation that somehow Bill is a tough customer. I think he was a tough customer in the right way. He was, has high standards, and I never for once, I always appreciated working for him, actually.
Sounds good. So then left Microsoft and then spent 11 years at Kleiner Perkins, and after that you've been angel investing for the last 7 years or so. So, you've seen kind of this evolution in the world of startups, and in particular in the seed investing space. From I remember when we did a company together, it was like a couple guys with an idea raising a couple $1 million from PowerPoint deck and reputations. Now it's sort of like you got to have the thing built and ready to go. So maybe talk about, as an investor, what you've seen and how the ecosystem has evolved in that time period.
Yeah, no, there have been huge changes. When I first got in the venture business, which is more than 15 years now, the first money in typically was what we would call a Series A. We would see a few, maybe a small team with a plan, and maybe some code was written, but often not. And we'd write a $3 or $5 million check. Not always, but that was a typical Series A, and they'd go 18 months before they would have what we consider a ready product today, an alpha or beta. And then after $3 or $5 million have been spent and 18 months, maybe you'd get some customer feedback. So quite different. I think so. There's a huge expansion of what you would call seed capital, and I think there's a couple of reasons. One is the ability and cost of actually getting a product to market is so has reduced so much. Partly because of cloud technologies, because tools are cheaper, the whole cost of the ecosystem is cheaper, and you know what? There's a lot more skilled people who can do it. I mean, when we first got in the venture business, you needed people who had been engineers for multiple years, and now kids out of high school can do this stuff. So I think for all of those reasons, it's just a lot cheaper and a lot simpler to get these projects going. Yeah. And then when investors kind of looked at that, and they kind of, this is a little bit in concert with the lean startup model, they're like, hey, look, rather than giving you lots of money, we'll give you a little money to show that the dogs are eating the dog food, which, as a model I totally appreciate as a venture capitalist. Why give them $3 million when you give them a little money? So risk reduction is what you try to do. Yeah. So the combination of those two things really expanded the pool of capital that went after these early phase projects. And, I think as a result, most venture capitalists now have moved what I call upstream. They're not really funding that really early risk of whether the dogs eat the dog food. They now want a project, as you said, that already has some customers or has working code. And you can understand why. So now they've left a lot of those risks to people like me who do seed stage investing.
Yeah. Yep. No, it's definitely the case, and it seems like everybody's an angel. Like anybody who's worked at a big company and made $5 or $10 million, they're putting money to work. So you're also teaching what, 2 or 3 classes at Stanford right now? Or?
Yep, I teach a number of entrepreneurship courses. I teach a class on social business entrepreneurship. I teach a marketing class. Yep.
So. That's probably giving you some new perspective on the world of startups. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the stuff you're doing there.
Yeah, so I really enjoy teaching Stanford Business School. The students I find are really energizing and smart. I think, there was kind of these waves. I first got into teaching there probably about, this is my 8th year. So it was right before, it was sort of after sort of the big recession was over and sort of the bubble had been burst, and people were sort of coming back 2005. Okay. And what happened was the reason I got asked to teach was because so many students wanted to take this class. It's now called Startup Garage, and they all wanted to start businesses. There's a big bubble, and then by 2008, it kind of tailed off. And so I think the student entrepreneurship bone kind of goes with the sort of same cycle in the venture industry. Yeah. But generally, I've found that Stanford Business School students are great to work with. They're very entrepreneurial. They're very smart. And the other thing that I've sort of, I mentioned earlier, I teach also social entrepreneurship, and it's been really fun there because there's plenty of people there who want to start the next Facebook or Google or whatever. But there's a fair number of them who want to do things that really more for social impact than for money, and that's been fun for me to work with them and apply the same lean startup models, try to think about how social businesses can actually generate some sustainability by driving revenue and having customers. So it's all good. I really enjoy it.
Cool. Well, it's so great to have Stanford right in our backyard, right? It's so many companies kind of get spun out of there, or the people end up working at other companies. So it's great asset to the Valley. I know there's some debate recently about is it Stanford sort of contributing to the Valley, or the Valley contributing back to Stanford? And I imagine it's some of both, but it's a big asset for us. So let's see if we've got some questions coming in and see if we can help. Once again, if you want to reach us, you can call us 844-4FOUNDER. You can email help@founderline.com, or you can tweet to @founderline. So let's start with one from George. It says, when you are angel investing, is there a valuation amount or structure, e.g. convertible debt versus equity, that causes you to invest or not invest? Please elaborate.
I wouldn't say a valuation or a structure causes me to invest. The reasons I'm excited to invest is some combination of the team, the traction or the progress, and the opportunity. But I do think that the structure I'm mostly neutral on, though. I prefer convertible debt structures, but I do.
So there's a lot of controversy about that. Like a lot of investors say, no, we'll only do it if it's a round. So why do you prefer the convertible debt?
Yeah, and I have to say I've had this argument, if you want to have it, with some of these very sophisticated micro VCs or super angels, and to this day I'm not convinced. I mean, look, these are very similar instruments. You know, they can almost act like the same. The reason to do convertible debt, now it used to be more of an issue because convertible debt was a lot cheaper. Now the cost of these equity rounds has sort of collapsed. So that may be one reason it's just as well to do equity. But I still think there's a lot of reasons to do convertible debt. Not a lot, but there's a couple ones. So when you do an equity round, you have to decide a number of items about the structure of the company. For example, the board,
right?
Which I think is probably premature to do. Like when I had my first money in, I mean, there's 5 angels, or each putting $100,000 in. There's one entrepreneur. I mean, do I really want that individual to go out and spend the time to figure out who should be on his board? Right. No.
You want a building product or figuring out what they're doing. Right.
And until we even know who the customers are, I mean, these things pivot 10 times. I mean, they want different skill sets. I mean, so I don't want the board decision to be made so early. Okay. So that's one reason I don't want to do equity. Okay. There might be other terms in an equity firm, say liquidation preference. Sometimes there's key man insurance. There's things that go with more sophisticated institutional investing that is not necessary, I think, in a seed stage deal. And if you do an equity round, then you lay down those things. And so I just think I want to loan you some money to see if it works, and if it does, I want to convert on whatever the sort of terms are that the next investor, with some risk premium. That's why I want a discount. But otherwise, I don't need all this other stuff to be negotiated or even decided now.
No, I totally agree, and I keep feeling like I'm in the minority, because as an entrepreneur, you maintain a lot of flexibility. It used to be a 10x premium, like $5K versus $50 to do convertible debt versus equity for legal fees, and I imagine that's 5 versus 10 now or something like that. I mean, it's probably not a lot, but yeah, a lot of them are. It's like a religious thing for them. So.
Well, but I would say the thing you just said is probably the biggest reason why I want to do convertible debt when I usually invest, which is I don't want the entrepreneur focused on legal things. Yeah. I want him or her to get the money and get to business and find out whether we have customers, whether we can build a product. So, and I don't see any downside. I mean, I have people say, oh, you can get squeezed out if the future investors want to pay you back. Well, just write a term that says they can't do that. Well, then they can do it anyway. Well, they can do anything. Even if you have equity, they can force you to redeem it. So, I mean, if you don't have a strong negotiating position because the company's not getting traction, then sure, anything can happen. But if the company's doing well and people want to put money in, then there's no disadvantage as far as I can see to owning debt rather than equity.
Okay, I agree. So George also asked about valuation. So at these early stages, like, uncapped notes are kind of popular with certain startups. So how do you feel about that?
I would never do an uncapped note. Okay. Yeah, uncapped note is, I mean, look, I want to do a deal that's fair for the entrepreneur and fair for the investors. Now, sure, there may be a range somewhere between, 4 and 6 million pre that I think is a fair cap. Maybe I'd be willing to go a little higher. Maybe a project deserves a little bit lower, but it's somewhere in that range. Anything in that range, frankly, I'm flexible. But the idea that somehow I would give you my money in an uncapped note, you would use not only my money, but you would use my expertise, my network, to increase the valuation in the next round to my detriment. Am I stupid? Why would I do that?
Well, the argument is, you get your 20%, and it's like, yeah, but these rounds are getting bigger and bigger. Like they're $2 million rounds, and they can make a lot of progress on that.
I agree with that, but that's not even really. I think it's more of a principle for me. The principle is, when I give you the money, I want to be on your side of the table. Yeah. I want everything I do to help you, but to help me too. If there's some tension, then like maybe you ask me for like a referral to somebody, and I'm like, that's going to help them, but it's going to hurt me. Why do I? That's not the right. That's not the right relationship.
Like a VC pays really high valuations or something like that.
Or maybe what happens? It's a customer, and now I get you a customer. Well, I give you a customer. That's great for you, but maybe it's not so good for me because now the valuation goes up higher.
No, I agree. All right. Well, so George, hopefully that helps a little bit. So we talked about structure and valuation. So let's move on. Here's one from Mike. It says, knowing what we know now about the social web, what things would you like to have seen Friendster do differently? So as background, Russ was an early investor. Actually, it was someone else at KP, right?
John Doerr was the investor, but I did help a lot on Friendster. And then later on, when much later, when the company didn't do well in its first incarnation, we did restructure it, and I did get on the board later, and John got off. But
and if you don't want to talk about it, you don't have to. But
no.
So Friendster was, like everyone says, it could have been Facebook, right? And I don't know if that's true, but
yeah. Well, so remember, there was a company between Friendster and Facebook that was supposed to be the big company. Do you remember it?
Orkut?
No,
that wasn't it.
No, News Corp bought it for $600 million. MySpace.
Okay.
People forget that.
Okay.
So there was a company. Well, so there was Friendster. Friendster was hot. Then MySpace came along. They got to 100 million users. It was not a small company. It was sold for over $600 million, and also got wiped off the face of the earth by Facebook. I mean, these are powerful network effect companies, and so I would say a couple things about Friendster. I think Friendster, I think, had huge potential, but it was early days of social networking. People didn't quite know what customers wanted. I mean, to some degree, being the first in that space was a little bit of a disadvantage. When Facebook came along later, for example, one thing they saw very clearly was that both MySpace and Friendster, people may not remember that, your homepage was very customizable. And so people went crazy. They put all these things, and there were all these third-party companies that were helping you customize it. Yeah, and it made the user interface and the user experience miserable. You would go on someone's page, like I'd go on your page. Maybe it wasn't your page, but some page you couldn't read anything. It started blasting rock music at you and all this stuff. Now Facebook sort of took the preview, like, look, that's a bad user experience. Let's standardize this. Let's make it clean. Well, you know what? That was smart. But in the early days, we were sort of, and by the way, MySpace kind of had the same thing that Friendster did. So it took some experimentation. Here's another thing. I mean, MySpace got really popular. Partly one of the big use cases was music.
Right.
And again, I think people didn't realize the power of this was the social aspect. It wasn't about media. People thought it was kind of a media thing. So I think there might have been some executional challenges with the Friendster. I'd be the first to admit that. But I also think that maybe one of the challenges in retrospect was it was a little hard. He got some, I can't think of his name right now, but the founder got some Jonathan, thank you. He got some like genie in a bottle there. He got something going. He got a spark. But the spark might have led him in a direction that wasn't actually really the big idea. The big idea was all about friend networks and stuff, and Facebook got that right, and Friendster and MySpace both didn't get it right. So.
Yeah, and Google, right? Which Orkut never really turned into anything.
Well, and there's one more thing. In the early days, right, a lot of people thought it was about dating, and Facebook didn't take that approach. So you kind of see the evolution. It's not like Facebook just killed these other two companies on their same terms. They came in with a different angle, which I think, frankly, we were so focused on the thing that we initially caught spark that it was hard to sort of see. I mean, it would have been like if we'd gone to the early Friendster board and say, hey, look, let's get rid of all this customization. Let's not focus on music and all this stuff. Let's focus on social networks like friends. Oh, and dating. Let's de-emphasize dating. People would go, are you crazy? That's why we're going. That's why we're going through the roof. You know. So in retrospect, it's easy to see, but when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to see it.
Yeah, and that was what, like early 2000s, like kind of in that time frame. So.
That's right.
Yeah, this stuff moves. In fact, there's a new social network. I don't know if you heard this. It's like called the No Ad Social Network.
Oh, really?
And it's like blowing up just like last night and today.
So because it has no ads, or what?
It's this designer guy. I forget his name, but Ello or Ella, some Ello. Thank you, Joel, our producer, typed it in there. So it lets you do all the Facebooky things, but it's not designed with advertisers in mind, is the theory. Like he's kind of anti-advertising.
So I heard another one I've heard, but this one, some guy recently launched a social network for the elite. And it's got no ads. It's very selective. Like he has to know, like you have to send him personal credentials. You have to sort of tell him where you're. and it costs like $8,000 to join.
And I bet you people are signing up.
Maybe.
What's that? You remember that name?
I forget the name.
Okay. We won't give him an ad. But all right. Well, Mike, hopefully that walk down memory lane helped you out there. Before I forget, you can reach us multiple ways. We need to hear from you. So send us your questions. Call us 844-4FOUNDER, email help@founderline.com, and or tweet to @founderline. So here's one from Vicky. How do you find most of your investments? Are they students from your classes at Stanford or some other source? So I don't know how many you're doing per year, or maybe give some metrics.
Yeah, so I've invested in about 40 projects since I left Kleiner of my own money. Most of them are on my LinkedIn profile or somewhere on the web. I think for the first few years, they were, I have a pretty big network. I've invested a bunch at Kleiner. People know me. I've met lots of people over the 18 years I've been here in Silicon Valley. So, I do get personal referrals. And, now that I've backed 40 people like you, give me referrals.
Yeah.
But the truth is, I think a lot in the last 5 years, I've sort of decided to focus most of my investing on people that I do know at Stanford. I don't invest while they're in school, because there's possible conflict
professor
there. It's just not quite right. Probably there's even rules about that at Stanford, but even if there weren't rules, I wouldn't do it. But I have the beauty of working with Stanford students, particularly in startup garages. I get to see the first phases of these projects. I get to give them input. I get to see how they evolve, and that's great for me, because then when they graduate, it's not like I'm meeting them for the first meeting or like 10 minutes. I get to kind of know them, and I got to know something about the project. So it really works out well for me.
So you cherry pick the ones where...
I don't cherry pick. I don't do every good project, but when I've had sort of a bond with the students and I've enjoyed working with them and I like the project, then I'm more amenable to doing it. I still do some investments outside of the Stanford sort of campus and people that I know at Stanford, but I do less of it, and I do find that I'm more attracted to people that have a stronger relationship with the entrepreneurs.
Cool. In fact, I met the Calypso guys recently.
Oh yeah.
And they were saying that they had taken your class at the business school, and you guys ended up not working together. So I got to call you later and find out the real details.
Okay.
All right. So Vicky, hopefully that helps answer your question. Here's an anonymous message from someone. It says, "It seems that big companies like Google, Facebook, Yahoo, etc., have huge resources, but are out-innovated by smaller startups. How does this happen?"
Well, that's an age-old question, and I would say a couple of things. One is, as a blanket statement, I'm not sure that's always true. Google's done some amazing things, and will continue, I think, to do some amazing things.
Sure.
And my old company, Microsoft, people say, oh, they didn't innovate for many years, and they didn't, but they have also done some good stuff too. So I don't think it's an absolute rule, but I think he's fair to say that it is amazing how small companies seem to come out of nowhere and spring in with things that, not only are amazing and sort of shocking, but they cling on to business models that big companies don't. And that's the thing maybe I'll focus on, and I teach this at Stanford Business School, the so-called innovator's dilemma, which Clayton Christensen from Harvard Business School has written about. I do think that when bigger companies sort of find a niche on the market and it's super successful, and they have customers, and they get brainwashed, and not in a bad way, in a good way. They're following their best customers. They're following the business model that's generating them a lot of money. It is hard for them to turn around and say, I've got a new idea. Not just that it's contravening what they're doing, but sometimes it's completely opposite, And so I think people do get a sort of a slave to what they're good at and where they make money and where their customers are, and so they're just less likely to sort of go off the beaten path.
Yep. No, totally agree. And some amazing things do continue to come out of all of these companies. Like the way over here, I saw 2 Google self-driving cars, right? And I'm just thinking, not very related to search, right? Yeah. They're just always doing new stuff.
I think a more interesting question, not a more interesting question, but kind of a related question that is maybe deeper in some senses, is why is it that big companies often have the technology, but don't pursue the business opportunities the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, like, for example, I was at Microsoft. We invented online travel reservations. Why didn't they keep it? Why did they spin it out into Expedia when it was worth nothing? And then Expedia blew up and was worth, now Expedia is sort of an old generation one of those.
Right.
But
I kind of forgot that was the case.
Yeah,
So
okay.
that was a Microsoft.
Well, why? Okay, I'll tell you why. Because in those days, one of the big revenue streams from Microsoft was selling software to the travel world. And there was a potential competition there. And they wouldn't necessarily like a big Expedia to compete with them being owned by Microsoft. That was one of the reasons. There might have been other reasons. That was one of the reasons. So there you go. I mean, it wasn't that we didn't have the technology to do it. In fact, we built it. The reason we didn't want to do it is because it competed with our core business. And that's the beauty of startups, is that they can wander around until they find a business model. They have nothing that keeps them from pursuing the best opportunity.
Baggage.
Yeah.
Yep. That's pretty cool. I'd totally forgotten Expedia was a Microsoft product, but in fact, it was called Microsoft Expedia, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then
it was spun out with the Microsoft team.
Wow, that's pretty cool. All right, well, Anonymous, hopefully that helps you understand that a little better. Let's move on to, here's one from Victor. What are some of the success stories from Startup Garage, either products or teams? What does Startup Garage do differently than Y Combinator?
Okay. So Startup Garage is not an incubator technically, although it has elements of an incubator. That's why Y Combinator is typically viewed as a accelerator or incubator.
Yep.
It is a Stanford class. Students get credit. It's not a full-time thing from Y Incubator. Like Y Incubator, it's very intense. These students do other things. So there's some technical things that are different. I would say, so what we do at Startup Garage is it's very experiential. We don't have lectures per se. We don't have cases, which often business school classes have. It's about students pursuing an idea in a team format that they want to actually start.
Yep.
And we basically, like an incubator, like Y Combinator, we basically kind of get them to do it. So we take them through a number of things. We start with human-centered design. We're big believers in that. That's the so-called D-School process. We get them out of the door to interview customers, perceive the problem in the minds of the customers, and so forth. We take them through a whole prototyping stage where they actually build prototypes, bring in front of customers. Along the way, we have them build what's called a business model canvas, which helps them understand sort of different elements of their business model. So we kind of take them through all these things, but it's all in the context of their own projects, and it's in the context of what they want to do. And we let them pivot. It's like a real experience of starting a company, but it has the safety of you're getting credit.
Money at risk.
Yeah, money at risk. Now, some students go into it thinking, I actually really want to do this, and they go through it and they think, yeah, this is something I do, and they leave. And some companies do that starting the day they leave and they graduate, and they do really well. DoorDash would be one that graduated last year.
Oh, that was the Startup Garage?
Yeah, DoorDash was in Startup Garage. We've had numbers over the years. Startup Garage has been around in different forms for many years. The current form is really only about 2 or 3 years old. So sort of Startup Garage per se has only had a few because there's only had a couple of classes.
Okay.
But the thing I would also say is some students take that class and at the end they think, you know what? Now that I've tried it, I don't want to be an entrepreneur. It's hard, it's lonely, I don't really have a good idea. I'm better off working in a bigger team, so it's a learning experience for them too.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So DoorDash intrigues me because, I think about food delivery, and there must be like 10, 30, 50 companies doing that. So what is it about that? Since you helped get him off the ground,
and I am an investor.
Oh, you are an investor.
I am an investor.
And then
yeah.
they went to YC after that, or not?
Okay, they
YC?
did actually. They did go to YC, and I guess I don't want to speak for why they did that. I mean, I think it was just they got in. It was an opportunity to kind of gel the team and keep the team together further.
But why that one? Why is that one doing well when like Waiter.com's been around for 15 years? I mean, there are a ton of these, right?
Well, look, I am not here to say that I'm an expert on exactly why DoorDash has been so successful, but I would say a couple things. So the first thing is, there was Tony and Evan were the 2 MBA students, and Stanley and Andy were the 2 undergrad engineers. So I had a good team. And what they started, so I mentioned this human-centered design process. Really, it's a very open-ended process at the beginning. And they basically came into the class, their problem definition was, we want to help small businesses. It was that simple. They spent they literally interviewed more than 100 customers in the first 4 weeks. They went to some customers, and the customers were like, I'm really too busy, and they said, can I just sit behind the counter and watch what you do? They originally thought they were going to do something like Groupon. They were going to help small businesses. Deals or help them sort of attract customers. And what they heard repeatedly was like, we don't really need more customers, but we would love to deliver. We deliver. They heard that a bunch of times.
Really?
And then they actually tried they built a couple prototypes. They built one that had to do with sort of a iPad display in the front of restaurants that had to do with customer service feedback. Because again, they were still kind of trying to think. And what they kind of heard again and again was like, we want delivery. Particularly then they had spent a lot of time in restaurants. They're like, we want delivery, And so they looked around and they said, we don't. I mean, I remember I had lunch one day with Tony and Evan. They're like, this doesn't feel like a business to us. We don't really know if we should do it. And I said, try it. This is you're hearing from customers. That's why we do the process. It's the whole idea about an MVP is make it simple, cheap, quick. See what happens. So they did, and their first customers were some students on campus who absolutely loved it. There was one woman who actually ate like 5 nights a week using the service. And that, like a few weeks later, they came back and said, we've got like a bunch of customers now who are just repeat, and we can make money even at small scale. They were actually driving at that point. But we still don't think it's a business. I said, I don't know if it's a business either. But like if you have customers and you have repeat customers and you actually see a model that might actually scale, just keep going. So it wasn't like they had this like, we know we're going to build something better. And this is kind of I think maybe the sort of unappreciated aspect of entrepreneurs is they don't really know until they try. In retrospect, they often go back and say, oh yeah, I kind of got it all. But it doesn't usually happen that way.
That's amazing, because you think, if you're a restaurant, there are all these guys who have been around forever. You just call one of them up and say, I want you to do my deliveries for me, and I guess.
Yeah, but I'd say a couple things about that. One is, structurally, the thing they're doing that economically and from a business-wise could be structurally drastically different is they don't own the trucks. They don't have to pay the drivers full time.
So it's just totally outsourced.
Yeah, so that shared economy gives them a different cost structure. I also think, they took a different approach to the customer too. They basically built I don't know if you've used the service, but it is hugely customer friendly. Yeah. It's so easy to order. They always show up on time. The food orders are almost always right. If not, they fix it immediately. So, my experience, I don't want to call it leaders on wheel, but my experience with these delivery services in the past was like not good.
Yeah.
My experience with DoorDash is not even because I'm an investor, just because I'm a customer, is just, I love it. I want to do more.
Oh, that's cool. All right. Well, we're going to do some sponsor stuff now. So relax, have a beverage. I want to thank our sponsors. We couldn't do this show without the help we get from our two sponsors, Ustream and Orrick. And let's start with Ustream. We started out and got in touch with Brad Hunstable, who's the CEO over there. He loved the idea and said, hey, we want to help you guys out. We want to get you up and running as quickly as possible. And literally, we were up and running in about 10 minutes from the time we got the credentials to log in, and everything was very straightforward. They've helped us through multiple issues when we went to do the show on the road in Europe. When we've had challenges here, trying to figure out exactly what's going on with certain things as the viewership has grown. And so if you're thinking about doing something in the streaming space, maybe you want to do a show yourself. Maybe you have some customers and you need to do a broadcast to your customers so that they can all learn something, or a seminar or something like that. You should definitely go and find out more about Ustream. You can find out more at their website. It's ustream.tv. I also want to thank the team over at Orrick. We work with Mitch Zuklie over there, who I've worked with on multiple companies in the past. And I always tell startup founders, one of the most important advisors you can get in the earliest stages of your company is a great lawyer. And yes, they do your legal paperwork and your contracts and your hiring stuff and everything else. But more importantly, they've just seen so many more transactions, whether it be financings or hirings or firings or M&A or whatever it might be. They're going to have a larger body of knowledge around what's common, what's uncommon, what's fair, all those sorts of things. So Make sure you get a great lawyer. I can vouch for the team over at Orrick, having worked with them before many times. You can find out more about the team there by going to their website. It's orrick.com. So that's it for our sponsor shout-outs. Once again, if you want to reach us, you can call 844-4FOUNDER. You can email help@founderline.com, or you can tweet to @founderline. So let's see what we got going here. More emails from Russ. This one's from Tony. You left KP to invest on your own as an angel. Are there aspects of working in a VC partnership that you miss? What about angel investing makes it more attractive to you?
That's a good question.
And are there aspects of, I'll add one, which is,
okay.
Are there aspects you don't miss from the partnership?
That's fair, that's fair. So I did enjoy my stint as an institutional venture capitalist. I think one of the reasons I decided to move on was I just have a very eclectic interest level for investing, and not all institutions can allow that. I mean, particularly at Kleiner. I mean, frankly, companies there have to exit with hundreds of millions, if not, even bigger. And I sometimes found like, hey, I really want to back this idea, I want to back this person, but I can't really justify that it's going to be that big. Or I in my heart of hearts right now, I couldn't even write a P&L statement to suggest it would be that big. So that was one thing. I think just from a personal interest level. The second thing was that I wanted to do other things. I wanted to teach. I wanted to get more involved in social things, and being an institutional venture capitalist is a full-time job. I mean, one of the things as an angel investor, and I don't know if this is good or bad, but when you're a professional investor like I was at Kleiner, if you're making an investment, you really need to know all the other companies like it. You need to meet other entrepreneurs who've thought about it. Maybe you want to think, maybe there's an entrepreneur I know who could do this kind of thing. So you kind of really have to size up the whole sector. You have to be really informed. As an angel investor, I don't have to do that. It's my money.
You can be lazy.
I can be lazy. Thank you. And I like that. I meet somebody I really like. I like the meeting. I enjoy the idea. I do maybe a little diligence, but I don't need to say, what are the 5 other companies that you might compete with? What are the other 5 founders that I should meet to find out if they're better to back? So
and it doesn't have to be $1 billion idea necessarily.
No, and it doesn't.
Just be a cool idea that you like the person, right?
So I think for all those reasons, it's sort of freeing for me. Now, what do I miss? I do miss the collegial aspect of the venture capital industry. Your work with smart people, your contemporaries. You get to sit around every Monday or more than Mondays, and there's a sort of give and take about what's going on in the industry and different companies. That's super valuable. I mean, I don't have that. I mean, the network that a firm like Kleiner has, access to people at Google and all the other companies we've invested in over the years, that gives them a big edge. So I'll just be clear about this. I don't think angel investing is a way to make a ton of money. Yeah. I think it's a way to have fun, back some entrepreneurs, have some fun relationships, get involved in some companies, but it's really a crapshoot after that. I mean, you really are, unless you take it so seriously that you sort of mimic some of the values and structure of a venture capital, firm, you're just going to be at a disadvantage in the marketplace.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Sounds good. So I think we got everything in there. Yep. So let's move on. Here is an email from Walter. What is it about Stanford that results in so many successful startups? Is it the culture or the resources or location? Or something else?
That is a great question. And I want to say, I went to Harvard Business School a long time ago, but I would say I don't think it's the students. I'm not sure it's the resources. I think it must be the location.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, come on. Like, there's lots of top business schools, and I mentioned Harvard, but there's Wharton, there's Chicago, there's dozens of them. Kellogg is another one at Northwestern. They all specialize a bit, and clearly, there's something about Stanford Business School and Stanford's culture as an institution, because it's the undergrads as well. I mean, lots of undergrads start companies. I'm an advisor to many to very undergraduates there too, through sort of, they have something called a pre-major advisor function there. So I meet lots of undergrads too who are really excited about starting companies. So I think it's partly because we're in Silicon Valley, it attracts, I mean, it's self-selecting, people who are excited about technology and entrepreneurship. They come here, and therefore, when they leave, they start companies. I think I think that must be what it is.
Yeah, no, I've thought about it, and you know, you could argue, like certainly Google and Yahoo, probably two of the biggest names to come out of there, right? They're both PhD program, you know, companies. So I was like, well, is that a coincidence? Like, are the professors there just really active? You know,
Facebook came out of Harvard.
That's true. That's true.
And you know, I know Harvard because I have connections to Harvard because of my business school days. That they are trying really hard. They built a whole incubator space there. They have seminars where entrepreneurs come in all the time, and venture capitalists go there. And so I mean, they're trying, and you know, it might take a while, but who knows? You know, and frankly, even so, I was in the Cambridge, Boston area in most of the 80s. I was there from 80 to 89. I was an MIT undergrad, and then I worked in a startup for 3 years as a software engineer, and then I went to business school there. And you know, in the 80s, certainly in the early 80s, Cambridge was as hot a place to start a software company that was out here. I mean, the whole AI industry
because of Lotus and
MIT. An MIT AI lab was like the hottest thing going. You know, Stanford had some of that, but you know, there was a lot. So that changed over time. But now, like biotech's huge in Cambridge now. I mean, there's big labs there. There's a ton of companies getting started. So I think it sort of swings about a little bit because of those institutions and their focus.
Yep. All right, Walter. Hope that helps you. Let's move on to Susan. If someone wants to contact you about an investment, what increases the probability that you're going to respond? So we talked a little bit about intros earlier, like from people you know, but I mean, do you get tens of these a day, hundreds?
No, I don't get tens a day. I probably, you know, it's not hard to find me. So if someone really wants to find me, they do, and I get over the internet, you know, over the transom emails, probably a few a week, maybe 10 a week of projects, people saying, hey, you want to take a look at this? And to be honest with you, I think, like I said earlier, probably about 5 years ago, I was more interested in reading and investing in more of them. And so I sort of would probably, the likelihood that I would invest in something that just came over the transom was probably higher than it is now. But I still read them, and you know, I still occasionally do. I would say, right now, the likelihood that I would invest in a project that came to me without any connection is probably pretty low. And to be honest with you, it's not because it's either good or bad. It's just because I just don't have the time to filter through all of them. So, you know, I think the thing about networks and connections is it's just a shorthand for filtering things. That's really all it is. It's not really that those projects are better. You know, in our Kleiner, we used to have this thing that said, you know, we would never invest in a company that just came in over the transom. But we did do one. I know, because I didn't actually invest in it, but it came in over the transom from my email from someone we didn't never know about. He was a Harvard Business School student. He found me because I was an HBS grad, and we invested in that company. It's still a private company, but it's a good company. I forget the name of it. It's one of these construction rental B2B networks.
Wow.
I forget the name of it.
Oh, that's cool. All right, well, let's, Susan, hopefully that helps you. Here's one from AC. How do you react as an investor when things in a company aren't going well? So I don't know how active you are these days in the companies, you know, but having worked with you, I know a little bit about that. Of course, it was always going well in our case, so there were never any issues whatsoever. But so how do you work with your companies when that happens?
Well, so I do sit on some boards, not as many as I used to, and it's a little hard to react to that question in the abstract. So I would say generally, I realize that particularly in the early stage phases of these companies, things are not always going to go well. And so the question is, you know, are people applying themselves? Are they applying themselves to the right problems? You know, if people are working hard, you know, and if they're focused on the right problems, my reaction is to be a cheerleader. Hey, let's figure out what's wrong. Let's move on to the next idea. You know, because I think that's, you know, that has to be the nature of really early stage startups. Now, later is different. Later, if there's executional problems, it might be because management needs to be either bolstered or replaced or revamped in some way, or it could be really we don't really have a business model that's going to scale, and then we have to be mindful of that. Let's not bury our head in the sand. So there could be things there. Again, I'm a realist. I'm not a pessimist either. So there's somewhere in between there. I mean, you want teams to be excited, and you want them to be sort of working hard, sort of with some future momentum. But if you feel like they're not focused at the right target, then I think you have to be realistic about that.
Yep. All right, AC, there's your answer. Let's move on to Carl. What advice would you give to a startup CEO who is getting conflicting advice from his 2 investors/board members? So you and I lived through one of those situations together, but so what would you say to Carl?
So I actually last fall I taught a class at Stanford Business School with Mark Leslie, and we taught a case where this exactly is the lesson you're supposed to learn. So I think there's 2 things to say about that. The first thing is, and this is sort of an adage that Mark uses, and I subscribe to it too, is that if you don't do what your board members say, you might get fired. But if you do exactly what your board members tell you to do, you absolutely will be fired. So don't do the latter.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because you're getting paid to make decisions. Your job is to tell the investors or the board, this is where we should go and this is what we should do, and back it up. Now, there might be good and reasonable reasons why people don't agree with you on that. But, slavishly saying, let's take a vote. What do you guys want to do? And then that is not a CEO. Yeah. CEO is about leadership. So my first answer to that is, don't necessarily think that you're there to do what they say. That's definitely not it. Now, the second question is more complicated. So if you do have a conflict, and there could be a conflict or a disagreement, what do you do? I would say 2 things. The first is, you try to get to the bottom of why. And so, not in a board meeting, because I don't think, you do one-on-ones with the people, and you sort of try to find out, like, why are they coming? And you try to, and you come in with your point of view too, and you try to persuade them. Even after that, you can't get people on the same page, or at least enough of them with you, then I think you just have to take a stand, and you just have to say, hey, we're going to go this way. This is what I want to do. And if you guys think it's not right, or you think I'm the right person to proceed, then you know what you need to do. Just fire me.
Yep. No, I remember a very specific situation with you, and what I give you credit for is there were 2 points of view, and they were in opposite directions. And what I remember you saying is, look, you can take my advice or not. Either way, it's going to be fine. And I remember in one situation, I went the other way, and you never thought about it again, right? Whereas this other person, just held it against me for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. And that puts you in a very awkward situation, right?
Well, it's just counterproductive. It's not constructive. Yeah. But you know what? I'll say one other adage. This is an adage I came up with, not Mark. But I tell people, like, in the venture capital industry, you only make 3 decisions. You decide when to invest, you decide who to hire as the CEO, and when to fire a CEO. Yeah. That's it. And so, like, you don't make strategic decisions. That's false and wrong if investors think or board members think they're doing that. So my attitude is, look, you have to back the team. They're the ones that are going to do the work. Until you don't. And then you don't tell them what to do. You just say, you're fired, and you get someone else.
Right.
So there should be never a situation where investors are pounding the table saying, we have to do this. Now, it's perfectly fine for investors if they have the right experience level and savviness, and and that's why they're good. You want to get their advice. You should be consultative. But it shouldn't be like, if you don't do this, I'm going to hold this against you. That's not constructive.
No, that was tough. So thank you for not doing that. So let's see. Here's one from Doug. Can you please share with us some insight into the decision process at a large VC like KP? For example, what are the steps? Do the decisions have to be unanimous? What happens when there are disagreements about investing? That never happens, etc. So
sure. Well, so first thing I'd say is not every firm does this the same. Some firms do have what I would call nominally a unanimous kind of process, like everybody has to be behind it. I know some firms that don't. I know a firm which I know a partner who explained this process to me, which I really liked, which I'm not going to name because maybe proprietary, but it's actually the inverse of unanimous. The idea is that when the partner presents something to the whole partnership, it's assumed it's just absolutely going to be approved. And the goal of the meeting and the feedback from the other partners is to give the sponsoring partner advice about what to watch out for. And then the partner can go off and decide whether that advice is changing his or her mind or not.
So all devil's advocate.
Devil's advocate, yeah. So there are different ways that firms do it. I mean, I think more often than not, I think it's, even the ones where they say it's unanimous, I think it's consensus building. If you go to a partner meeting and more than half the partners don't want to do it, then it would be unusual to get it done. Now, can the more senior partner get something done no matter what? Yeah, for sure, that happens. But for the most part, I would say what happens is people go to meetings with the idea that, persuade me. And if you're persuaded and there's a consensus that people are persuaded, then usually a project gets approved.
Okay. Sounds good. And so in those, you had some of those situations, I'd imagine,
Many.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, you get to the end of the process and it's like, look, I don't have the support from my partner. So ultimately you make that decision about, is this good for my partners here and my relationship with them? Like, could you still cram it through if you wanted to, but perhaps at some political capital expense? Or
I think again, it depends on where you are in your career.
Yeah.
It depends what goes on in the firm. It also depends on maybe the size of the project. I mean, if it's a seed project or a small investment, and it's kind of in you've made a bunch of money last year, and this year they're like, hey, we don't really like this project, but if you really want to do it, you can do it. So these are social animals, right? These are not, and people would like to say, oh yeah, there must be some strict process. And by the way, here's another thing. It's also you got to remember that it's not only what you invest in, but how you get compensated. And in some firms, there's a lot of sharing of the economics, and in some there's not. So in firms where there's not a lot of sharing of the economics, I think the decision making tends to be more distributed. By that I mean, like in some firms, there's like a pot of profit that everybody shares more or less equally or not. And in those cases, I think you need a lot more consensus because like people's economics are all dependent on each other.
Right.
I know some other firms where there's some shared economics, but a lot of the economics is you make money on the projects you get to invest in. And they give you a budget. Hey, you get to spend $20 million this year. Go to town.
Yeah.
So, you show it to your partners, but your partner's like, hey, look, Andy, if you want to do this, or, Joe, if you really want to do this, that's not very interesting, but go for it. It's part of your $20 million allocation. If you want to do it, do it. So the economics part is part of the incentive.
Yep. All right. So, Doug, hopefully that gives you a little insight. We got time for a few more here before we run out. This one's from Max. It says, I'm looking at joining a 30-person startup as an engineer. I want to be sure I make the right decision. What sorts of things would you suggest I ask in order to figure out how well the business is going? So that's a great question, Max. A lot of engineers don't necessarily think that thoroughly about how the business is going. So what would you say in those cases?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things I would find out are, I'll give you the big themes, headlines, and then we can talk about how you might dive into it. But to me is the quality and stability of the team. That is definitely one of the things I would focus on. The second one would be, customer traction, especially if it sounds like it's 30 people, they already have a product. So, and by that I mean, not so much like, are they making tons of money, but do customers love the product? Is it repeat use and so forth? And the third thing I would say is a bit on sort of how stable the finances of the company are. Not whether they're making a ton of money, but like how much money they have in the bank. Are they going to run out of money soon? Yeah. And were they able to raise money already from institutions that are likely to, if things are going well, invest again? I mean, so those are the kind of big buckets I would look at.
That's great. And Max, what I would add to that is, as CEO, when I was getting questions from engineers who were joining, I was always, I always thought the people who were asking the tough questions were really smart to be doing that, and I didn't mind at all walking them through as much detail as they wanted to get into. So don't hesitate to ask those questions if you're wondering about them.
I think that's a great question, and the rejoinder to that is that if you ask for a bunch of information and they're not very forthcoming, I would take that as a little bit of a mixed signal. I mean, if you know, like, so you're going to be part of the company and you'll want to know that stuff. And there should be, I mean, they might say, well, some of that's sensitive, I can only share some of it, but they're not willing to share any of it. I'd wonder why.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I do the same thing on investments now. Like when I ask for data and they're like, we don't really have any data, then it's like,
well, you know, one of the things I learned early as a venture capitalist, and it's amazing to me how few VCs do this in their due diligence, is that when I was doing the diligence of investing, I'd say, look, you know, they always send you their presentation. It's not that you look at that, but the thing I always say is, like, I want to see their last board book. I mean, because the bad news is never going to come in any presentation they send you.
Yeah.
But if there was bad news in the last board book, probably would be there, right? So,
no, that's good. All right, we might have time for one or two more. Here's an email from Jonathan. We have 2 offers to invest in our Series A. One is with a more well-known VC at a lower valuation, 10 million pre, and the other is with a less well-known VC at a higher valuation, 15 million pre. We like both investors, but we don't want to leave too much money on the table. Any suggestions?
Wow, hard to say, right? Because I don't know this person, I don't know the company.
Yeah.
But sort of the abstract problem, I understand well. You know, take a lower valuation for a more well-respected VC or institution versus not. And I'd say in the abstract, and you know, I think, let me say 2 things. One is there is difference between investors, and that can result in real value. I mean, I think some institutions, and it's not just the institutions, the particular partner who's going to sit on your board, their experience or the firm's network or that person's experience could make a difference in the long run or even in the medium term. So whether you should take some kind of haircut or not, you know, there might be. But let me say the flip side. The flip side, though, is that value, that business building experience, that network, you can get other ways too. In other words, you can take the less experienced investor, but maybe negotiate as part of that. Like, hey, I want to go out and get a really experienced independent director, and I'm going to give him a lot of shares or her a lot of shares to make up for the fact that maybe you don't have as much experience as an investor. So there might be other ways to fill the thing. So I think what you got to think is, don't just take money at a higher valuation thinking that you don't have to fill the other important aspects that an experienced company building director won't bring.
Yep. And maybe, Jonathan, ask them to come up a little bit. Like maybe they'll come up to 12 instead of 10, and then
there's always room for negotiation.
Yeah, exactly. So, but be ready if you're going to do that. You got to know if you're going to walk if they don't come up. So have that in mind. All right, let's take one more and then we'll wrap up. From Peter, we're a 2-year-old startup and have been running with the 2 founders as co-CEOs. It feels like it's time to have one person lead the effort and make decisions. How do we sort that out without pissing each other off?
Wow.
I've never lived through that. I don't know if you've had
I'm not a big fan of co-CEOs. I would probably recommend you never start that way because
Me too.
You know, you're in this kind of position. Look, I think at this point you really have to look at what skill sets you need to take the company to the next stage. You guys have to be realistic and sort of decide who has those skill sets, who has maybe the maturity to take it, maybe the leadership, because you know, maybe if it's really about scaling and hiring people, because it's sort of at 2 years, if the company's going even on any reasonable trajectory, going to be a lot about leadership from year 2 to year 5.
Yep.
So you kind of have to take that seriously. And it doesn't mean somebody has to be pissed off. I think you just have to have maybe a bit of a tough conversation, but also find the space for the person who's not going to be the CEO to have a really constructive role in the company. But I'd also say if that doesn't work quickly, in other words, if that other person who doesn't get the CEO role is not being constructive, then I think you're going to have to cut that out.
Yep. Well, and to your first point, like, don't do co-CEOs. Like, that's a bad idea in general.
I think it's a bad idea.
Well, we're out of time. Russ, thanks for being with us today. You can follow Russ on Twitter. His Twitter handle is @RussSiegelman. I'll let you figure out how to spell that. Thank you once again to our fantastic sponsors, Orrick and Ustream. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @FounderLine. You can send us questions in the meantime to help@founderline.com. You can go to the website, see about upcoming guests, and subscribe to updates. Download our podcast from iTunes. That's it for this week. Thanks for watching. Here's to the crazy ones, and we'll see you again next time.